Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism, your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you're tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
Good evening, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon. Welcome to another episode of the Mormon Newscast. This is episode number 26. I am joined by my fellow broadcasters, my fellow anchor people, Rebecca Biblioteca and Bill Reel. Good evening to both of you. I hope you're both doing well.
Fabulous.
Yep, doing great, RFM.
Well, we're starting off with a rather somber pair of stories tonight. And if we have the title slide with the different stories on it, there's the first slide. The first story is titled Mormon Murder Suicide in American Fork, Utah. We are going to be getting to that story. Unfortunately, in the past week, there were a pair of double homicides in Utah, one in American Fork, another south in your neighborhood, Bill, in Washington, which I understand is very close to St. George, Utah. And we're going to be starting with that one. And so, by the way, if there's anybody who has kids in the room, just a warning, this is going to be gruesome for the next couple of stories before we get to the second story, justifying the LDS purchase of the Kirtland Temple, which will be a lot more user-friendly. And finally, a piece by Bill Reel on unpublished revelations of Joseph Smith. Rebecca will be taking the second story, and I'll be leading out with the first story. So if we can get ready to go for that, let me see if I can see the slides. I can. Oh, that means it's my story. Here we go. This is the headline from St. George News, the local newspaper down there, Bill Reel. Do you get that? Do you read the St. George News?
I do read the St. George News from time to time, and this happened in Washington, which is the city that I live in. It is the city right next door to St. George. One sort of flows right into the other without any space in between. You wouldn't really know you left one and entered the next city because they sort of one big city running all the way along.
I know when I saw this story break, I sent a link to you just to find out, if
I
you
knew
any
the
of these
person or the
people
family. Yeah. And no, I didn't.
Right. Well, the headline there in the article that was written by Chris Reed is police say suspect in Washington City homicide has no remorse after killing parents and shooting at brother. Dateline St. George. The two victims in a double homicide in Washington City on Tuesday have been identified as the parents of the suspect in the case, according to the police report of the shooting deaths. Authorities say the suspect, 28-year-old Mia Bailey, admitted to killing her parents and attempting to kill her brother and expressed no remorse for doing so. Here's a picture of Mia Bailey. It was handed out by police. The location and date of this photograph are not specified. Going on with the story, according to reports, Mia Bailey did not live at her parents' home, but drove there on Tuesday evening, June 18th, 2024, entered the home and shot her mother and father. She then went down to the basement area where her brother and his wife were locked in a room and shot a bullet through the door, which did not hit anyone. Mia Bailey then went upstairs once more and put one more bullet in her father's head and also another bullet in her mother's head to make sure they were dead. Her mother was apparently alive prior to the headshot, making sounds of some sort. This is all according to the statement that she made to police, according to police records, according to the Washington News. Mia Bailey then left the home in her yellow Kia Soul automobile. Mia Bailey's brother, who escaped out the window of the room in which he was hiding, went to a neighbor and called police. And by the way, that's my own synopsis of the different reports on this one slide. Here's a picture of police cars outside the residence there in Washington City. The parents, Joseph and Gail Bailey, were found dead when Washington City police responded to reports of shots fired at the home the two shared with one of their sons and his wife. According to the police report, Mia Bailey surrendered Wednesday morning after an overnight search that stretched throughout the area. She is being held at Purgatory Correctional Facility in Hurricane, pending a preliminary hearing. Did I pronounce that correctly, Bill?
You pronounced Hurricane correctly. It's the only place on the planet where they pronounce it that way.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Bailey is accused of killing her parents at their home on East Chinook Drive in the Washington Fields neighborhood of Washington City on Tuesday evening. She also attempted to shoot her brother, who was living at the house with his wife, the report states. And there's a picture of the yellow Kia Soul. Police say Bailey admitted to killing her parents and attempting to kill her brother. Mia further stated, this is a quote from the report, Mia further stated that she did not have remorse for her actions and that she would not change what she had done. The police report states, Mia stated, I would do it again. I hate them. She later told police that her brother was not her main target, but, quote, she would not have been sad had the gunshot killed him, period, end of quote. And here's a picture of law enforcement arresting Mia Bailey the following day. I think it was in the morning after the all-night search. They finally found her several miles away, hiding in some tall grass against that wall you can see in the background. Bailey's brother, Corey Bailey, and by the way, of all the different reports and newspaper accounts that I read concerning this, it was the Washington News, the local newspaper, was the only one that included this detail, at least that I saw. And I thought it was significant. Bailey's brother, Corey Bailey, sought a protective order against Mia Bailey last July. That would be July 2023. According to 5th District Court documents, 3 other minor children are listed as co-plaintiffs in the order, presumably the brother's children. Judge John Walton granted a temporary protective order on July 18th. The order came a month after Bailey, which would be Mia Bailey, who is transitioning from male to female, was granted by the court a legal gender and name change from Colin Bailey. On October 16th, the court said both parties agreed to have the protective order dismissed. Walton granted the dismissal without prejudice, allowing the order to be refiled if needed later. I put this in here because I think it's significant to know that this is not something of recent vintage, at least this animus going on in the family, and it goes back at least to July of last year, where a protective order was sought and obtained by Mia Bailey's brother. This is an update by Pat Reevey of KSL.com, published June 21st, 2024. A 28-year-old woman accused of brutally killing her parents in their home is now facing 11 felony charges, including 10 first-degree felonies. However, the prosecutor has filed a notice that they are not going to be seeking the death penalty. Mia Bailey was charged Friday in 5th District Court with 2 counts of aggravated murder, a first-degree felony. Prosecutors note in charging documents, however, that the state is not seeking capital punishment. Accordingly, aggravated murder is not a capital felony. Aggravated murder is punishable by an indeterminate prison term of not less than 25 years, and which may be for life or life in prison without parole. Okay, so that's the first story that we're covering there, and then we'll get to the second story in American Fork here presently. Comments from you, Rebecca, on this first story?
Well, I think it's just been a really sad couple weeks, and I didn't realize till we're all on here together that the first story you just covered is right there where Bill is. The second story is a mile from me. Like, I drive that direction all the time. So it's just been a really sad week when it comes to things like this. And I'm just really sorry that there's so much pain and so many people are suffering. And I feel really bad. It's been a lot to read this kind of news, but I know it's important to cover it. But yeah, it's been a lot.
Your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, I hate to even jump in here. I mean, I think it's in our faith, especially on the believing side, there are a lot of preconceived notions around the transgender issue. And I just want to be sensitive here and recognize that a tragedy's happened, and until we know more information, maybe we'll never know, sort of understanding what was going on in that home with the way Mia was raised, and what the family said, each of those members of the family, what their situation was and interaction with each other. And as I think all of us know, family dynamics are really complex, and there's a lot of trauma to go around, even in the healthiest of families. And this doesn't seem like this was one of those.
Yes, and I share your reluctance to speculate here. I think possibly the only relevance potentially of her transitioning may have been that it may have created some tension with some Orthodox or very conservative parents, possibly brother. I'm not sure. Something happened that got her very, very upset with her parents. She hates them. She would do it again. Regardless of how she was treated, none of that's going to serve as a legal defense against what it is that she's admitted to doing and what it is that she appears to have done, what she's alleged to have done. Let's just leave it that way. Of going to her parents' house, walking in the front door, and then shooting them both, and then putting a bullet through the locked door of her brother's bedroom downstairs. So I don't know. However, that's apparently the state of things, and I will leave it at that. All right, ready to go on to the next one? Okay. Let me see here. Got that up. And now we'll go to the next story, which is the murder-suicide in American Fork, Utah, which happened 2 days later. The first one was on Tuesday, June 18th, and this one was on Thursday, June 20th of 2024. This was a married couple who were found fatally shot inside a home. This is a news report from Thursday evening. At the point, they were not even releasing, I think, the names of the victims, though those came out later. They were still trying to piece together what had happened, though it may have been rather straightforward. They were being reticent to share details at that point, but we do have more details going on. The main point of this clip, from my point of view, is about the neighbors and how it is that, whereas the first story we covered seems to have been long-standing, the animus, at least between her and her brother, from the protection order, this came as a shock to the neighbors who didn't see this coming. Of course, they never do. But also, they were together at a baseball game just the night before where they didn't see anything wrong. And that's covered in this story.
We're covering Utah County tonight, where an American Fork couple was found dead inside of their home, apparently from gunshot wounds.
Yeah, police still gathering evidence from the crime scene. They still have a lot of questions about what exactly happened there. Meanwhile, neighbors say they didn't see any warning signs that something like this could actually happen.
Paul Nelson live for us on scene with more. And Paul, what are police saying so far about what they found?
Well, investigators are not identifying the couple, but they are confirming that it was a husband and wife, and they were called to this house near 1400 North and 80 East. You can see they're still here, but they were called here after a family member found the couple inside one of the rooms, and this happened just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And investigators also say it appears both of them suffered at least one gunshot wound, but they are not specifying who shot who. Also, American Fork Police Chief Cameron Paul says this case might not be so clear-cut. He says there are unique factors that were found inside the room, but he will not explain what those factors are yet.
There's a lot of forensics that go into the investigation, a lot of evidence collection. Obviously, we'll incorporate the help of the medical examiner's office that will be able to give us a little more information on manner of death and cause of death.
Now, we spoke with the neighbors who say they knew the couple very well, and this might sound cliche, but they say they truly are stunned that something like this can happen. They say both of them were wonderful people in their view, and they were even playing softball with a group of friends just last night, and there wasn't any hint of any kind of problem. In fact, the neighbors say that the wife actually brought ice cream for the rest of the players. The husband spoke to neighbors about making future plans. So again, no sign of any trouble happening here in the place where two people were found dead inside their home. Reporting live, Paul Nelson, KUTV 2 News.
So I have no idea at this point as to what it is that the officers found inside that they thought was strange or unusual. But within very short order, they concluded that it was a murder-suicide and that the wife had been shot twice by the husband, who then turned the gun on himself. The headline is "Tragedy Strikes American Fork. Local couple found dead in apparent murder-suicide." This from the American Fork Citizen, an article by Rob Shelton, published June 21st, 2024. A quiet neighborhood in American Fork was shaken on Thursday afternoon when police discovered the bodies of 57-year-old Olin Johnson and his wife, 52-year-old Carolyn Johnson, in their home. The American Fork Police Department has officially classified the incident as a murder-suicide, stating that Olin Johnson is believed to have shot his wife before taking his own life. The tragic discovery was made following a report of the bodies being found in their home at approximately 12:41 p.m. on Thursday. Upon arrival, police found both Olin and Carolyn Johnson deceased. Here's a picture of the two, Olin Johnson, 57, and Carolyn Johnson, 52, who were found dead inside their American Fork home on Thursday. The family is requesting privacy as they grieve their loss. We express our most profound and sincere condolences to the family and friends of Olin and Carolyn, the AFPD said in a statement. In the wake of this heartbreaking event, friends and family have come together to support the Johnsons' 6 children. A GoFundMe page has been set up with a goal of raising $20,000 to help cover funeral expenses and other unexpected costs. Here is the bio page for Carolyn Johnson from BYU, where she was an adjunct faculty. She was a voice coach and a teacher there, and I understand also privately she would teach voice classes, and she was a performer as well. Celebration of Life was held last night, which was Sunday, and it was announced here. A celebration of life. There's a picture with Olin and Carolyn in the middle and their children on each side, with spouses, I would presume, if they're married. It was scheduled and happened on Sunday, June 23rd from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. in Art Dye Park in American Fork. It was a candlelight vigil. Underneath it, it says, please bring goodies to share, a candle, blanket, and warm memories. And further underneath that, and this is part of the article, to further honor the memory of Olin and Carolyn Johnson, a candlelight vigil has been organized by friends and family. The vigil will be held on Sunday, June 23rd at 8:30 p.m. at Art Dye Park, where the community will gather to mourn and remember the couple. And here is, I'm not sure if this is a tweet that went out apparently from some of the children, where it says, for those wanting to come celebrate my wonderful parents' lives, this candlelight vigil is happening tomorrow night. Further funeral arrangements, are still being made. Thank you to everyone who has reached out and supported in other ways. And here are 2 photographs of that vigil that was held last night. There were hundreds of people who turned out for this vigil. And we're going to go to Rebecca here in just a second. But I want to throw this now to Bill and ask if you have any, I'm sorry. Bill and I are both trying to do the slides together and it's not working out. So do you have any thoughts about this story, Bill?
I am sort of the same with the first one. Like you can't ever know, but it in this case, you see this from time to time. This happens, I feel like at least once a year, we're all sort of dealing with, and almost always it's the husband who shoots the wife and then shoots himself. And again, I just can't imagine what it is that goes on in someone's home that drives people to make that as the decision that they feel that's the option, that's the best option for them to carry out. And again, can't even begin to speculate, but I think that if anything, these 2 stories remind us that mental health and people feeling like they have other options to resolve serious issues in their life might be something that we as communities and also in terms of government resources, I think need to always maybe be trying to do better at.
What do you think about this, Rebecca?
Oh, I've been thinking a lot about this today, and I was actually going to go to the vigil. The park is right by my house, but my dang dog disappeared for about 20 hours, and we were all panicking and driving around trying to find her. So we found her, but I missed the vigil because of that. So, it's I've actually seen I've seen her perform in, I think, at least one production. She's extremely well known in our area. She's performed in the Stadium of Fire and local productions. She's a very beloved person, in our area in Utah County. And so this news is just, I think, shocking to a lot of people. A lot of people were finding out for the first time on social media and saying things like, oh my gosh, she was my voice coach, or oh my gosh, she taught my daughter voice lessons, So on the surface there, you have this really unfortunate event. I think there are other levels to it. And I think maybe it's hard to describe or talk about what I was thinking today, maybe in this forum. But when I saw the announcement for the vigil to celebrate the wonderful parents, meaning the husband and wife. And when I learned, that there'll be a viewing of the 2 of them together, which makes me assume that it's going to be a double funeral from what I'm reading. I just, there's part of me that says, and you want to be respectful of all the children. I can't even put myself in their position. But part of me says, is there anyone that's sort of speaking for her, for the victim? I mean, and again, it's such a loaded situation. I know there were signs and posts about families are forever, things like that. And I think it just brings this big conversation. Like you said, Bill, you saw this in Enoch, where someone killed their spouse and their entire family. You see this kind of thing, and you just wonder how much this families are forever. If it's not ideal or working here, let's just move it to the next life. I mean, that maybe sounds a little callous, but I wonder if there are those thoughts sometimes in a Mormon male. I don't know. Have you guys thought about that at all? I was just a little concerned. And again, I also understand the kids wanting to heal and grieve and do these things. But I also just wondered, is there anyone that's sort of speaking up for her? And I'm just trying to say that as sensitively as I can. As RFM knows, we had conversations today, and I was a little more upset about the idea that who is speaking for her, the victim. But I'm not going to go into that here. But I don't know. It might be a larger conversation. And again, just a tragedy for everyone. I actually drove past the house today on my way home from work, and there was a young person taking mail into the house. I assume a young adult that lives there, seemed pretty normal. There were a lot of cars around, but again, it's just, you just can't even fathom it. And then all these other factors of having a double funeral and a double viewing. And if you really think that through, what that might mean, or the emotions that might elicit with some people, maybe on her side of the family, I don't know. Have you guys thought any more about that?
Well, I thought the house where this happened was on a cul-de-sac.
No, not a cul-de-sac. It's on like a bend. It's on a bend.
On a bend. So
Yeah.
it legitimately is on your way
Yeah.
home or wherever it was you were going.
Yeah.
Okay. You weren't making a special point of driving by
I'm
there.
not a looky-loo, no. And I did not take pictures. That would be terrible. Although I have been known to do that. I also live by the Lafferty murder duplex, and I have gone there and taken pictures. So.
Oh my gosh. Well, I know, look, these kids are going through something absolutely horrific. They have been whopped upside the head with an emotional 2x4, which I do not expect that they've even begun to recover from yet.
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, I'm left thinking, is there something wrong with me? Because this seems kind of bizarre that you've got this isn't a couple who were well respected and really wonderful. I mean, apparently they were both of those things, at least among certain circles that are speaking out. But they weren't walking along and got struck by lightning together, right? He murdered her. And it's like nobody's wanting to mention that, or we're just sort of ignoring that and whistling past the graveyard and pretending that everything's still okay. Bill?
Yeah. The only thing I want to add is this might be really confusing to even the kids. I mean, I can imagine situations where the kids really see a high functioning, happy home, and whatever problems the parents had, and obviously there were some, whatever problems they had could sort of be kept out of view of the kids. I think some parents really do a good job of that. And this may be, again, speculating, but this may be a situation where they're sort of having to deal with two contrary things being true. And that may not lead to the best ability to sort of figure this out in quick time with the sort of stress and I don't know what mental, burden and trauma that this is on them. This could really be just an extremely, and naturally, even in the most understanding of what's going on of these kinds of situations, I think it would be difficult, but I can see potential stories where they sort of really got caught by surprise and don't know how to handle it.
Oh, yes. Just like Carolyn got caught by surprise when he pulled out a gun and plugged her twice. But, I'm not here. I want to make it clear. I'm not here to judge the children at all. Okay. I'm looking at it separate and apart. And I have, thankfully, that advantage to be able to look at it from the outside and not be involved in it like these children are. And God bless them. I wish only the best for them. But I have to second what Rebecca says is there nobody who's speaking for the victim here? She has a family, I would think. She must have parents and siblings, and no one's speaking for her. It seems to be one unified voice of, this is a very, very sad thing, but they'll be together forever. So let's share our families. Let's gather together and share our memories of both of them. Anyway, those are just some passing thoughts that I have, and it just seems bizarre to me at this point. But regardless of that, I'm not trying to be judgmental of the family, but I'm not getting this.
No, and there are a lot of comments and perspectives and opinions on social media. If you look at any of the posts, there are people that have known the couple longer, and they do weigh in on possible scenarios that we won't talk about here. But there's always way more to a story than on the surface. But yeah, it's just a tragic week. I mean, both those things, just really sad.
Yeah, can I just say something here, make an announcement? If you've got a problem with your marriage, okay, there's a reason God created divorce lawyers. And it's because you can get divorced. Okay. Divorce is not the end of the world. Divorce is a completely viable and socially acceptable alternative to either living forever in misery or killing your spouse. So if you're in a situation like that, just call up a divorce lawyer and get divorced and get out of the house and let everybody continue to live their lives. It may be a different life than you had envisioned together, but at least it will be a life that everybody gets to continue to live.
But see, I have a perspective on that. I believe that in Mormonism, divorce is perhaps worse than, just kind of continuing your eternal family later. Do you know what I'm saying? I feel like that plays into some of these situations, especially when the entire family is killed, like what happened in Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
And in that situation, I believe the spouse was going to leave, was going to take the children, was going to break up the eternal family, the sealing. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I just feel like I think of Chad Daybell, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at his scenario, and his children are still, even though he now in court has been convicted of murdering their mother,
Mm-hmm.
the children are very aligned with Chad. So to me, I think sometimes in Mormonism, and you guys can weigh in, sometimes the idea of divorce is worse than some of these other things that the rest of us would think, oh, well, that's far worse. I don't know. Do you think that there's that microcosm there, that thought?
There is a problem that can happen with men. I think it can happen with women too. I see it more in men, is the idea that if I can't have you, then no one else will. So I'll make it so that you can't be with anybody else. And then I'll take myself out of the equation because I'm not going to hang around to deal with the consequences of what I did.
And I will say, just Landon makes a really good point, which is if you look at how the community is responding to these two stories, again, two different areas for sure, but both highly Mormon LDS communities, and the transgender murderer is getting a lot of negative sort of lashing out at him in the comments. And again, this family sort of this murderer is being sort of treated as if he's a good person.
Yeah.
And I think that may be one of the more significant things about these two stories being juxtaposed against each other.
Not being judgmental. I think that the me is a she.
Yeah, sorry, she. Yes, my
it's
bad.
okay.
Yes.
I mean, she's gone through all of this. I mean, she's gone through a whole lot of transitioning. She's an adult, 28 years old. I think that first off, I want to say that a trans person engaging in this kind of activity, I know there's a knee-jerk reaction among certain elements to focus on the trans aspect instead of looking at all the non-trans people who are doing this kind of stuff, like just up the road in American Fork, 2 days later, not to mention across the country. It is much easier for a certain group to other. We want to find something about the murderer that we can make them in a group that's different from us. And I think that her being trans just lends itself to that very easily among certain segments of society. In American Fork, how do you other this guy? Besides the fact he's a wife-killing son of a bitch, okay? But how do you other him within the community when he's an upstanding member of, I'm imagining, the church of the community? He's a multimillionaire. He's got $1 million house. What is it that you can say about him to other him or put him in another group to make yourself feel safe or different in some way? And maybe there isn't anything, and maybe that plays into why it is there's a different reaction. I'm just trying to address Landon's question. I think it's a very good question, though I don't know we can come to any solid answers on it.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go on here. And the next story is going to be one from Rebecca about the Kirtland Temple and an announcement that was made rather recently by my old missionary companion, who is now the church historian. Take it away, Rebecca.
I feel like we need some kind of palate cleanser. I mean, that was a heavy first couple of stories. Oh my goodness.
Or something. Yeah, absolutely.
Whew, yeah, no, I've been thinking about those this whole week. So, but yes, this is a story I've been wanting to cover for a while, and I was actually all prepared to cover it last week, and then I had a conversation with our favorite historian, Dan Vogel, who pointed me in the, gave me some other ideas. So I kind of retooled what I was doing, because he's in the chat, right? Usually he's like a shark. If you say something that's not right, he's going to pop up and he's going to tell you, which we love, right? I just love having that element there that you can get real-time clarification. I won't say correction. I'll say clarification. We love Dan. So this is an article that came out just about a week or so ago, like I said last week. And this was in the church news. It's been everywhere in Deseret News. Everyone's talking about it. Of course, we all know the Kirtland Temple and all kinds of properties were purchased by the church months ago. And the church has since taken ownership. They are leading the tours. And some of the artifacts have even made their way to Salt Lake. With my co-host Landon, we've gone to the Church History Museum. We've seen the door from Liberty Jail. We've seen we've seen letters between Emma and Joseph, all kinds of things. So, but this is an address that was given at the Mormon History Association. And it's kind of funny because you have to ask yourself, why was this address needed? So the article is called "Why the Kirtland Temple and Other Historic Properties Are So Valuable to the Church." In other words, why did they pay so much freaking money?
Was it like $190 some odd million?
192. And I also heard anecdotally that also other kinds of donors made donations to the community of Christ. So I think that number is much higher. And again, it was the temple itself, and then all kinds of properties, some in Nauvoo, artifacts, things like that. There's a whole list, lots of articles that you can look up. So the subheading is "The answer is rooted in Latter-day Saint doctrine," says Elder Kyle McKay, church historian and recorder. And I will say, not only is he the church historian and recorder, he is the former mission companion of our own Radio Free Mormon. And there's a picture of them. I know you don't know how I got this picture, RFM, but there the two of you are on your bicycles in Japan. Okay, if you squint, it kind of looks like it could be the two of you. It's the best that AI could do. So.
Elder McKay is the one on the left. He looks a little bit like Jim Carrey back then.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you look really industrious and sincere, ready to go get some converts in Japan. Anyway, they were former missionary companions, and you podcasted about different things that he has said before. But in this case, he is addressing the Mormon History Association, which means scholars from all over, right? Scholars that know their stuff. And he's the church historian, so he knows his stuff. And he is going to tell everybody why they spent so much money. Why was it so important that they purchased all these artifacts in the Kirtland Temple? And it says on March 5th, the joint statement, Community of Christ and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints announced the transfer of the Kirtland Temple as well as other historic buildings and artifacts to the Church of Jesus Christ for $192.5, we can't forget the $0.5 million. While most church members rejoiced, many inside and out of the church may have wondered why the church would ever spend such a large sum of money on anything other than humanitarian aid.
Okay, I got to stop you. Did he actually say other than humanitarian aid?
Yes.
Is that every other dollar they get other than this 192.5 goes to humanitarian aid?
I know. That's what I thought. Who are they talking to that's asking this question? I don't think it's any of us because we know the answer. Anyway, I'm sorry. Okay, straight face. Here we go. All right. Elder Kyle S. McKay, a General Authority 70 who serves as a church historian and recorder, who is a lawyer, addressed the topic in an opening keynote lecture before a crowd of hundreds gathered at the 59th Annual Mormon History Association Conference in northeastern Ohio on Thursday, June 13th. So a couple weeks ago. So, and some pictures of the beautiful temple. I temple watch and I know all things temple. I think the Kirtland Temple is beautiful. I love it. He says, I was not a decision maker for the church, but I feel I can speak somewhat of the transaction from the perspective of the Church of Jesus Christ to give at least a partial understanding of why the church would spend such a large sum of money for the Kirtland Temple and other real and personal property. Again, I feel like they must be getting this question a lot because, it sort of has some negative connotations. Why would they be addressing this in this way if they hadn't heard it over and over? Why did you spend so much freaking money?
It's also very important to clarify that he wasn't involved in the decision, because you
Yes.
never send out the decision makers, because
Yes.
then they might be responsible for answering some direct questions about what was really going on. He can just talk about it. So he's not subject to actually knowing what happened.
No, and that is used all the time. As you know, my co-host and I watch all kinds of city council meetings. We read all kinds of minutes of meetings where church officials go to these sites where they're building temples, and almost every single one of them eventually says, that's above my pay grade. That's above my pay grade. I'm not a decision maker. And Landon keeps saying, who the heck sends somebody to a business meeting where a decision needs to be made when you're not the decision maker? Anyway, that's a tangent, but you're absolutely right.
It's like the Swedish Rescue, where they didn't send an
Yes.
apostle at all.
Yeah.
All they sent was the church historian and Richard Turley. Yeah, it was brother Marlon Perkins, I think it was.
Marlon Jensen?
Marlon Perkins?
Marlon Perkins. Huh?
Not
Give
Merlin.
us the theme song to Wild Kingdom, will you?
Exactly.
Da, 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 da. Okay. No, they said the church historian and a flunky to go and address the questions, because they don't want to have anybody there who's going to be responsible for what's said.
Yeah, I think that's true, especially in this case. It's pretty outrageous. So, okay, not a decision maker, but he's here and he's going to explain all of it. So the question is, why buy so high is what they're saying. Returning to the question of why the church would pay such an eye-popping amount for the Kirtland Temple and other properties, Elder McKay focused on the sacred events of one day, and that's April 3rd, 1836. And he says, remember, he's the historian and he is addressing historians. Many historians, keep this in mind as we talk about this. He says, I cannot think of a single day during the ongoing restoration when there was more restored than April 3rd, 1836, he said. So incredible significance is what he's alluding to. So, and I love AI. You can't make an angel or some kind of heavenly visitor on AI. At least I can't without wings. So I know that Mormon angels don't have wings, but use your imagination. Suspend your disbelief. So, if for those of our viewers or listeners that are not familiar with this auspicious date in LDS church history, on this date, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery were visited by Jesus Christ and experienced visions where priesthood keys were conveyed by ancient prophets Moses, Elias, and Elijah. Again, this is part of the keynote address that Kyle McKay is giving to the historians. Bullet points are the keys of the gathering of Israel, offering the gospel of Jesus Christ to God's children on both sides of the veil who have not made crucial covenants with God nor received their essential ordinances.
Because
Also,
you can't gather Israel unless you have these keys.
Yeah, this is what they're sort of alluding to, which we'll talk about that in a minute. The dispensation of the gospel of Abraham, restoring covenants and blessings promised to Abraham, including the promise of eternal life and exaltation. All of this happened because of these visitations on that day. And also the extremely important one, I believe, the sealing power. The sealing power. This is what the missionaries first hit people with. Do you love your family? Did you think you can be with them forever? Well, you can't. But we can tell you how you can, right? And it's our sealing power in our church, enabling the eternal binding of relationships and the legitimacy of priesthood ordinances, ensuring they are recognized in the hereafter. So Kyle is not wrong. This is big. This is huge. This is the essentials of Mormonism right here on this day. So that makes sense to me now, why they would want to purchase this temple.
Well, it's kind of like all this important stuff happened there, so we have to buy the building.
That's it. You have to have it. And
Why do you have to buy
community
the building. It's kind of like a non sequitur in my mind. He's
What?
talking about all the important stuff that happened there, so that justifies spending $192.5 million plus however much rich Mormon donors contributed. But the church paid $192.5 million for a building, and so here's why: because this important stuff happened in this building.
Well, and it's interesting because being in the hands of the wonderful COC, and they are able to take tourists through, guests through, and they are able to share their narrative from their perspective, which is very different from the LDS narrative. Now that the LDS owns the building, they are able to share these events that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believe happened here. So these were not necessarily shared before in a tour by the COC. So the answer to why the church spent the money is rooted in Latter-day Saint doctrine. Elder McKay said, "There is little we do in this church of lasting significance that is not done under the authority of the keys restored." The keys that were restored on April 3rd, 1836 in the Kirtland Temple. These keys authorized Joseph Smith and all succeeding presidents of the Lord's Church to gather Israel on both sides of the veil, to bless all the covenant children with the blessings of Abraham, to place a ratifying seal on priesthood ordinances and covenants, and to seal families eternally. The power of these priesthood keys is infinite, and he used the word breathtaking. So it doesn't get bigger than this, right? They probably paid too little. They should have paid more. This is absolutely incredible.
So he's putting a lot of weight on the actuality of this event happening on that date in this place.
Exactly. And obviously it did happen. And obviously it's very well documented. And obviously they have a lot of journal entries and evidence and all kinds of things that tell you that, yes, indeed, this event did happen. At least this is what I thought. In fact, I never thought about it very much. But a couple months ago, I did an episode with my co-host Landon on Mormonish with the amazing Rob Lauer. He's a Reformed Mormon. He lives back east. He studies this stuff a whole bunch. And he brought up some really interesting points about what exactly you just said, RFM. What exactly is the provenance, I guess if I can use that word, of this event. So we did a podcast about this, and then we went on Mormon News Roundup. Yes, I'm often on 2 different news programs. I can't get enough of the news. And we covered it there. And I just thought this was a sort of a great clip. It's only a couple minutes long to kind of explain what I'm talking about when I say, where's the provenance exactly of these miraculous visitations, these restoring of these keys, the reason that Mormonism is what Mormonism is today, the reason that people, when their children get married in the temple with that sealing power, they have to stand outside. What is the provenance of this? So if you don't mind, Bill, we'll just play this for a few minutes and then we can talk about it.
Now, the Sunday afternoon session is probably the most important session. And here we had President Nelson give his address. And guys, he spent a great deal of time talking about the Kirtland Temple. And I believe that's a particular topic that you guys know quite a bit about.
We were yelling at the screen. This is an episode that we just put out with the amazing Rob Lauer, I think last week. You can find it on Mormonish Podcast, all about, well, you can see the title of our episode, Elijah and the Sealing Power, the Kirtland Temple Narrative Debunked. And maybe, Landon, do you want to go into this? Because everything that President Nelson said, this is not accurate as far as what happened at the Kirtland Temple. And one of our concerns with the Kirtland Temple now being in the hands of the LDS Church is the COC, Community of Christ. They did not share this narrative of Elijah, Elias, Moses, or the Savior because they've gone through the documents. They understand the provenance is not there to even show that this ever even happened. And now that it's in the LDS hands, I believe this is a story that is going to be told to every visitor that comes. We saw it shared by President Nelson today. Landon, do you want to go into this? Exactly what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's right. To tell a narrative that they know isn't true, right there in conference is just extremely disappointing. We went through this just on that podcast, as you said, and it's clear Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, neither one of them ever mentioned Elijah, Moses, or Jesus Christ showing up in the temple. It's not there. It's not in the records. There's a third-hand witness from Oliver Cowdery's brother, Warren Cowdery, that was written on the back page of a journal. Nobody knows where it came from. It has no date on it. And so to make this claim with Joseph and Oliver, not only did they never say that it didn't happen, they kept referring to it happening in the future tense, that it would happen, that they shall come, that they will come, which was a very Christian idea at the time, was that Elijah and Elias and Moses would come right before Jesus came in the end and restore all of these keys. That was a Christian belief. And from the words that we see from Joseph Smith, he was still looking forward to that happening, even though this is 8 years in the past that it supposedly did happen. So there's a huge problem with this narrative. The church leaders know this. They have to know this. And yet here they come out and tell you this story that just has no backing.
Yep. And to be clear, so when we talk about a third-party account from scribe Warren Cowdery, it said things like they beheld Jesus. They saw. Last page of a journal. The entry right before that entry is an account of Joseph Smith passing out the sacrament to all of the participants in the Kirtland dedication. And of course, we know the sacrament was wine at the time. So you have the entry about the wine, then you have a third-party account in the very end of a journal about seeing Elias, Elijah, Moses, the Savior. So then what happens? This is 1836. We never hear about it ever again. Joseph and Oliver never mention it in their entire life that this happened in the Kirtland Temple. Finally, in 1842, it's rewritten by Willard Richards into a first-party account where it appears that Joseph says, I then saw the Savior. I saw Elias. And this is given in a sermon by Orson Pratt. That's the origin of it. The provenance is very, very suspect. Now, I know they say it was originally a first-hand account, and as scribes often would, they will look at this first-hand account, supposedly written by Joseph or Oliver, or both, and then they'll put it in the journal as a third party. They'll change it to they. So again, they're hinging on this missing document out there where it was written. But to me, the smoking gun is just what Landon said in all their orations, both Joseph and Oliver. They never said, remember when that thing happened? Remember when Christ came and Elias came and Elijah came? They do not say that. They say, we look forward to the day Elijah will come. We look forward to, the welding link, to the sealing power. And this was regular Christian rhetoric. So it was always a future tense. In their lifetime, it was never mentioned as something that had happened. So that's extremely problematic. And I would like more people to look into it. Different people. Our friend Rob Lauer, he had a lot of information on it, but I would love to see this researched farther because it's a big deal if this is the narrative that everything hinges on, the sealing power. When as a post-Mormon, you have to stand outside the temple while your children are inside being married. What is really happening there based on their own doctrine and the provenance of these sealing keys? I think it needs to be looked at. Boy, I'm on a soapbox, aren't I?
Yeah, this was a fantastic episode, and Rob Lauer did a fantastic job. And what we learned from that episode, or at least what I learned from it, is the fact that not only was the priesthood restoration retrofit, the Aaronic priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, not only was the first vision retrofit, is that the Kirtland Temple narrative is completely retrofit. And what we saw in General Conference just a few hours ago was President Nelson trotting out a narrative in which we know that the facts are absolutely not accurate. It's not a matter of faith. We know that it did not happen because there was no contemporaneous effort, no contemporaneous record of it, and that the people who were involved said that these things were yet to come into the future. So it's a fantastical narrative that is completely divorced from reality, and President Nelson is doubling down on it, saying that these are the important things which are leading me to build temples. So the foundation for his temple announcements, we know, is built on a sandy foundation, and that's an incredibly problematic thing to take. Any other comments on the Kirtland Temple narrative with regards to President Nelson on this, guys?
I'd like to hear from somebody who has taken the tour, the new tour. I have yet to find somebody that's gone through because I would like to know what is being said. As Rob Lauer explained to us, the COC, Community of Christ, did not share this narrative because they did not trust or acknowledge the provenance of it, as we explained. So I would like to hear. So if any of you have taken that tour, drop us a line. Let us know what they are saying. Whew, there we go. That was it. Back to the slides. And you probably saw, this is the reason I didn't do it last week, because you saw Dan Vogel go, I don't agree with this. So exactly. I had to talk to him and find out exactly what was going on. Because he pointed out to me that there were some people that wrote in their journals, and I'll go ahead here. Let's see. That did mention that there'd been some talk of, the Lord appeared, the Savior had appeared, that kind of a thing. So one that he pointed out to me was written by, let's see, is this, I guess I have W.W. Phelps in one. Yeah. Okay. So this is one from Lucius Pomeroy Parsons, who I think I'm actually distantly related to his sister. And he says they have lately had what they term a solemn assembly. They have had wonderful manifestations there of late behind the curtain. They report that the Savior appeared personally personally with angels and endowed the elders with power to work miracles. Because what I learned, oh my gosh, from watching this incredible tour of the temple by Lachlan McKay is that they would actually hang curtains, like divide the room into 4 pieces, sometimes 2 pieces. They had these curtains, just really innovative, that could hang down. So while there were other things going on in that area, baby blessings and preaching, in one corner of the curtain, this is where it happened. This is where Joseph and Oliver, claimed that they saw the Savior. The second one, W.W. Phelps to his sister. On Sunday, April 3rd, the 12 held meeting and administered the sacrament. It was a glorious time. The curtains were dropped in the afternoon, and there was a manifestation of the Lord to Brother Joseph and Oliver, by which they learned, thus the great and terrible day of the Lord, as mentioned in Malachi, was near, even at the doors.
Rebecca?
Yes.
What does that by in brackets with a question mark mean, and the learned in the same
I have
sentence?
no idea. I think we should ask Dan Vogel. I know he's there.
Is that an attempt to reconstruct something that's illegible in the document?
It
Yes.
probably is something like that. So what's interesting to me then is yes, there was mention of it. There was talk, that the Lord had appeared. There was talk of a restoring of, I don't know, just in general, but it was certainly nothing like what they're claiming. And so I had a conversation with Dan, who I have listed here. Let me go to my slide here. Let's see. I talked to a lot of people. John Hamer, Dan. Okay. As I wrote, Dan Vogel, badass historian, and he gave him permission to use this quotes. He says, the Kirtland Temple, Jesus, Moses, Elijah, Elias narrative is part of the priesthood restoration narratives that were developed 1834 to 36 by Smith and Cowdery. They are highly suspicious. Smith and Cowdery were co-presidents, and with the temple visions, they claimed keys that no one else had, which made it more difficult for challengers to break away. I don't believe the visitations had anything to do with the sealing power. This is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way. Later associated with temple marriage and baptisms for the dead. These were merely dispensational keys that were later applied by Joseph Smith to baptisms for the dead. The understanding evolved. It was an evolving kind of a narrative and a story. In 1836, there was no baptisms for the dead, and polygamy wouldn't be associated with the keys, especially since Cowdery would come out so strong against it in the following months and years. So Dan helped me understand a little bit that there were some narratives where people did kind of, oh, here he goes, good, the third person. Yeah, no, it's not backdated. And we never claimed it was backdated. We just said third person, not first person. I feel like the church, if they had something else in third person and it didn't support their narrative, they would cut it out. But in this case, it's okay. And rewritten during Joseph Smith's lifetime, as Dan explained to me. And so that means, he must have been on board and okay with it. But
by the way, Rebecca, a good example of that is we ignore affair and we go with the word scrape.
Yes.
Because we don't think it's an original by Cowdery. It's added in by either his nephew or his brother, and hence we decide that that's not something we want to go ahead with.
Exactly. Or you can believe him as a witness, but you certainly can't believe him when he says this. You know what I mean? You kind of pick and choose if it fits. Yes, RFM.
I wanted to just go ahead, since I went and looked it up. It's very easy to find. There's 3 quotes that, if I can add here, from Joseph Smith, where he talks about Elijah and the restoration of keys in the future tense.
Yes, there are
and
many.
These are from well-known documents. This is from October 5th, 1840.
There are many.
1840, where Joseph Smith says Elijah was the last prophet that held the keys of this priesthood, and who will, before the last dispensation, restore the authority and deliver the keys of this priesthood, in order that all the ordinances may be attended to in righteousness. Once again, that's October 1840, Joseph Smith. That's 4.5 years after this incident is alleged to have happened in the Kirtland Temple in April of 1836. Another is from 1841, again from October, Joseph Smith. The dispensation of the fullness of times will bring to light the things that have been revealed in all former dispensations, also other things that have not been before revealed. He shall send Elijah the prophet, and etc., and restore all things in Christ. That one's not quite so clear in my mind.
Yeah, but everything is future tense, which is normal, the Reformation rhetoric.
Right. And another similar quote like that from 1843, he shall send Elijah the prophet. Yeah, Joseph Smith continues for the rest of his life to talk about the coming of Elijah, which was critical. We know it's critical because of Malachi, right? And so, but it seems to be forever a future event to Joseph Smith, and not one that I see him referring to as having happened in the past.
Yeah, exactly. And our episode, which is really long, I won't play it here with Rob Lauer, but it covered all that, which is interesting. And if I could even read this from Rob Lauer, who's a Reformed Mormon, has a very interesting perspective. And when he was talking about these these other accounts, that Dan brought to my attention, he said, what is missing from these various third-person accounts are references to keys being restored. They all refer generally to the nearness of the end of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, or being endowed with power to work miracles, all of which is completely in line with Protestant apocalyptic expectations and Pentecostal Christianity belief in supernatural gifts such as miraculous healing, speaking in and interpreting unknown tongues. But where are references to keys of sealing powers, keys for performing marriages, sealing people to each other? It's reasonable to assume that Joseph was okay with including the vision in his history, but I've yet to see anything from Joseph or Oliver or their contemporaries at the time stating or implying anything like the 1852 current LDS interpretation of the vision. So sorry, I couldn't read that and see what Dan Vogel said. But I guess what we can say is it's very wiggly. Do you think we can arrive at that at least?
Yeah, I think that Dan had commented that Joseph Smith had a different interpretation of the event.
That's true. And then, of course, for another perspective, I had to reach out to John Hamer from the Community of Christ. It was really interesting to talk to everybody about this. And again, I will say, we don't know exactly, and we can't explain it. But should really Kyle McKay be announcing this to all of these historians who know better than that this narrative is set in stone? So John Hamer from Community of Christ says, was I on the slide? Yes, I was. The Kirtland Temple visitations is not an important story. Again, they didn't focus on this. COC, when they owned the building, this was not a focus. There were visionary experiences in Kirtland Temple. However, LDS ideas that there were visitations rely on late sources that are anachronistic. So he's saying late sources, Dan Vogel saying not late sources, wiggle room there. While LDS people date the sealing power restoration to this time, this is anachronistic and false. Obviously, the idea that you are seeing both Elijah and Elias, two names for the same figure, I think a lot of you have heard about that, shows that any vision is drawn from the visionary's context, in this case, his own ignorance of history. It's a total nonsense story in terms of sealing power that is completely discredited from a historical perspective. So I think there are a lot of opinions on this. I would love to see Dan do a podcast on this. I would love to see Mormonism Live do a podcast on this. I think it's really important because they really talk about this like it's completely locked down. This is what happened. This is the reason that we do all this. This is the most important thing, the sealing power that we offer to everybody who joins that nobody else has. And I think it's too important to just kind of be on this foundation that seems to be kind of sandy to me. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Have you podcasted about it before? Have you thought about it before?
I think that Kyle is correct that unless they double down on this and cinch this down as an actual data point in history, the church is in real trouble. So they have no choice but to double down on it, I think, regardless of its historical provenance.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. There is no other choice. They have to talk about it extremely authoritatively. And like I showed in my little clip, President Nelson also talked about it as extremely authoritatively. It happened in the way that we're saying.
Well, we've got it in the scripture, section 110.
Bill, were you going to say Section 110?
Yeah,
but that has a whole interesting provenance too. So nothing is what it is. Don't we know that by now? Bill, what do you think? Any thoughts?
The only thing I want to add to this, one, the fact that you put curtains up means that whoever has the experience behind a curtain, everyone on the other side of those curtains can't see that experience. Yeah. So any claim made is made by a small subset of people in the Kirtland Temple, even if other people walk away having heard that happened and then testify that it happened. They would have to see it for it actually to be an experience they could testify to. The second thing is that based on our episode last week, where Dan Vogel and Radio Free Mormon and myself took a deep look at the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses for the Book of Mormon and looked at numerous quotes around those experiences, even the church likes to say the 8 witness experience is a physical experience. But what we found was there were several quotes attributed to John Whitmer and to Martin Harris, who both said that the 8 witness experience was a physical experience and that there were other problems with it. It was a second sight or spiritual eyes
By the way,
experience?
so you said that they said it was a physical experience. Did you mean spiritual experience?
No, what I'm saying is that the church wants to tell you that the 8 witnesses is a physical experience, and that it then goes hand in hand with the 3 witnesses, which is a spiritual experience. And by having those be 2 very different experiences, they testify of each other. What we found in the episode that we did is Dan and Radio Free Mormon and myself, we put a bunch of quotes up on the screen that showed that John Whitmer directly and Martin Harris secondhand attributed the 8 witness experience as a spiritual eyes, a second sight experience. And hence, when Joseph and Oliver go into the Kirtland Temple, should we expect anything else when the 3 witness experience and the 8 witness experience is said to be a second sight or spiritual eyes experience? Why wouldn't the Kirtland Temple be the same, more of just the same?
Yep. No, I think it's great. It's really interesting to look into. And again, I appreciate Dan and his perspective, and I would love to see him actually do a podcast on it, because there's a lot to it. There's a lot of nuance. And I think that he keeps us from going off the rails, right? And ranting like I did in the video I showed. So,
Well, I mean, for you, this whole thing about the sealing keys being the reason that non-member parents have to wait outside the temple became recently not just theoretical for you. Isn't that right, Rebecca?
exactly. Let's just say that in very general and broad terms. It was not theoretical at all, and it was very painful. So I think maybe that's why I'm so about this.
Yeah, understandably so. Okay. So thank you for that. Let's see what we have next. Was that the end of your story on this one, Rebecca?
I think that's the end. I think I took up about 3/4 of the time.
It sounded like you had come to a period.
I had.
Did you want to mention that?
That was our discussion question, but I think we already discussed it. So I don't think we need that, but we can enjoy the picture. That's a nice drawing of a painting of what happened there.
And one thing that could lend itself to some confusion in this area is that during the dedication ceremonies, there were many people claiming to see angels and Jesus in different accounts. So, lots of people were seeing angels. I don't know that they gave their names, walking up and back and forth on the roof, right? You remember the stories about the angels walking back and forth on the roof. And it was like when they got to the end of the roof, it was like they were walking off stage past a curtain, an invisible curtain. They would disappear from view, and then others would come back from this invisible curtain, like an invisible. They would appear there on the edge of the roof and just sort of walk along it to show their approbation of the proceedings. Yeah. All right. Well, we have a story next from Bill Reel. It has to do with, I'll let you take the first slide there, Bill. It has to do with the recent publication by our very own young Stephen Smoot and Brian Passantino. I think
that's how I pronounced it.
Passantino, who are editors of a book where now they are presenting and collecting some of Joseph Smith's uncanonized revelations.
Yeah, and I just want to say one more thing about the last story, which is, yes, Mormonism, and really only a few brands of Mormonism, think that Elias and Elijah are 2 different people. Do we know, by the way, do you guys, either of you know, if there are any other Christian denominations or sects that believe?
Well, given my encyclopedic knowledge of the beliefs of every other Christian
denomination, I know, but have you ever heard
that? No way. No, I have no idea. No. All I know is what you know, which is that Elijah is the Old Testament word for the individual who appears in the Old Testament. And when he's referred to in the New Testament, the same individual, the Greek form of the Hebrew Elijah is Elias.
Yeah.
No, when you Google it, there are, page after page of it's the same person. Of course, there are apologetics. There's Fair Mormon that try to explain it. But I think for the world at large, most people understand it as 2 names, 2 references to the same person.
Yeah, when they're pushed up against the corner like that, they always have to go with Elias isn't a name, it's an office. Exactly. Someone's in trouble with their argument when names start becoming offices that can be applied to multiple persons.
You know how to tell when Fair Mormon's lying to you, don't you?
How?
When they're moving their lips. All right, here we go. Here's the video. This is the information on Joseph Smith's uncanonized revelations. Good evening. Tonight we delve into the publication by historians Stephen Smoot and Brian Passantino, named Joseph Smith's Uncanonized Revelations. This book uncovers over 40 previously uncanonized revelations by Mormon founder Joseph Smith, also specifically the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. From prophecies of war to celestial doctrines and the blessings of polygamy, these revelations offer a fascinating yet controversial glimpse into Smith's prolific role as a revelator. Let's begin with this so-called Adamic language, a supposed divine tongue revealed by Smith. According to Smith, this ancient language includes terms such as Amen, allegedly meaning the being which made all things in all its parts. However, this so-called ancient language suspiciously borrows heavily from English. It's as if Smith created a mystical dialect by tweaking English words, which contradicts everything we know about the evolution of language. Language evolves independently and distinctly over millennia. Therefore, the credibility of this Adamic language is highly questionable and seems more like an invention to bolster Smith's prophetic claims. Moving on to the prophecies of war and peace, one revelation from 1837 warns of a very fierce and very terrible war approaching. The prophecy is reminiscent of the 1832 prophecy in the Doctrine and Covenants about the American Civil War. Yet, the prediction of war is hardly unique or revolutionary. Human history is a relentless cycle of conflict and peace. From ancient battles to modern warfare, societies have always experienced periods of turmoil, interspersed with relative calm. Smith's revelation fits neatly into this timeless pattern of human behavior, offering nothing particularly prophetic or new. Now, let's address the contentious topic of polygamy. Despite increasing beliefs among Latter-day Saints that Joseph Smith did not originate polygamy, substantial evidence points to the contrary. The book highlights an 1842 revelation where Smith marries Newell K. Whitney's daughter, Sarah Ann, endorsing the practice. This is consistent with records from the Nauvoo Expositor, Nauvoo High Council, and Nauvoo City Council, all pointing to Smith's involvement in polygamy. These historical documents suggest that Smith not only originated the theology, but also promoted the practice of polygamy, challenging the narrative that he was not its originator. And while this book deals with the unpublished revelations of Joseph Smith, it's important to note that there are unpublished revelations from other LDS leaders, including the 1886 revelation where John Taylor, LDS prophet at the time, claimed he was directed by Christ himself to continue polygamy at all costs. But it's certainly not the only one. In conclusion, while Smoot and Pasatino's book aims to strengthen belief in Smith's prophetic role, it also opens the door to a critical examination. And because who one trusts as their spiritual authorities, and because of the spiritual beliefs one feels compelled to hold, they can give a person or a group of people permission to marginalize, traumatize, and even kill. It is essential, therefore, to distinguish between real revelation from the gods and the myths and fabrication that spiritual gurus and their systems have imposed for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Back to you, RFM.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Reel. That was fascinating. You know, I think that I actually recognized each and every one of those cult leaders that you put up there on the screen. They went by fast, but I think I nailed them. You know, theoretically, or
yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. So
yeah.
I don't know that I don't have anything necessarily to add to the end of that. Everybody thinks their church is true, and everybody knows the crazy that's on the other churches outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of us maybe could also do ourselves a favor if we just considered for just a moment, maybe our church wasn't any different. And hence, the things that we teach and we say, we ought to be 100% sure, or as close as we can to that, or make sure that it's healthy before we take the things that our leaders say and kind of implement it into practice.
Rebecca, your thoughts?
Oh, I don't think anyone could be that self-aware, right? Could we? I don't think so. Who is it? And someone will say in the chat, it's I think a famous atheist who says, isn't it amazing out of all the religions in the world that you happen to be born right where the true one is being practiced? Everybody thinks that, right? Of course we do. So no, I think it's very constructive to look at things like that, because when you see everything back to back to back, I think it does start to make a little dent in what you're thinking. I hope maybe for people to see that and make comparisons. I know a lot of people say, oh, I can't talk to my relatives or my family up front. Maybe I can get them to watch this documentary about another religion or another cult or something.
Mhm.
And maybe they'll see some kind of similarity that will sort of, do something, a little rewiring. Because we did a podcast recently on Dave McCraney's book, How Minds Change. And we learned that you can never just go at somebody with facts, because that'll just make them kind of assimilate them and gaslight themselves to make them part of what they already knew, which
Right.
is why you can have wonderful people say, oh, I already knew all about that. I knew about the polygamy. I knew about the 14-year-olds. I'm fine, right? Because it's more painful to change your entire paradigm based on these new things that you're hearing. So you kind of assimilate it. This is a great book, Dave McCraney. Oh, it's wonderful because it really tells you can't talk to your family and friends like that. But what you can perhaps do is something like this, show the different revelations back to back. Say, look at this. This is really interesting. Are you picking anything up? I don't know. I just love to see it presented that way. I don't know. What do you think, RFM?
What I think there is that there may be a connection, that sometimes there are beliefs that are thrust upon us, or someone shares with us, or we stumble upon them, that are so painful to us that would cause us to reorganize our entire outlook so much that we refuse to do that. And that we therefore, like you said, we'll take these facts, we'll incorporate it into our worldview, but our worldview is not going to change. It's going to be more
Correct.
defensive, going to be making excuses for it. And I can't help but thinking that a similar thing's going on with that murder suicide in American Fork with some members of the community, that they can't, it's too painful. It's too psychologically devastating to actually deal with the reality of what happened. And that may be why it seems surreal to me, the way it's being approached. By the way, on a lighter note, and Joseph Smith's examples of the Adamic language, I can't help but be reminded of Zoom talk from the early 1970s. You remember the show Zoom?
I
think it was
love
on
Zoom.
PBS.
We're gonna zoom. Yep.
Yes. Do you remember
Come
Zoom talk?
on, give it a try. Yeah, you watched
Me and
it.
Mark Zappala would talk Zoom
Yeah.
talk on the back of the school bus, and nobody else could understand us. I'll give you an example if you want. Okay. Hi, bye, Fribbins. Bibis, ibis, bamban, alban, clibbif. Waban,
Yep.
tubu, 3B, abba, splabbit. You know what I was
Bye-bye,
saying to
Fribbins.
Bill?
He's too young. He has no idea what we're talking about. Yeah.
All you do
no.
is take every syllable of what you're saying and put a B in the middle, and you.
Yep.
So hi bye is hi. Hi bye,
Yep.
Fribbins is hi,
Hi, my
Fribbins.
Fribbins friends. Yep.
Yes. Dibis, ibis, maban, alban, clibbif. It's not easy to do. I've lost my knack, obviously. Dibis, ibis, maban, alban, clibbif. This is man on cliff. Waban, tubu, 3B. 1, 2, 3. Ah, splabbit.
So did you actually do this out in public? Because of course my friends and I would
Yes.
do it like inside, but
This
we
was the
never would have
joy.
ever done that in public.
The joy of doing it in public is to be able to talk to each other about whatever we wanted to talk about, and nobody else could understand us.
Yep, that's true. Did anybody talk about Joseph Smith's revelation of the 15 other planets besides Kolob? That's
You
sort of
mean
my
the one
favorite.
in facsimile 2?
Yes. Where he
Yes.
looks up into the sky and he says, there's Zip, Fliss, Shin Fliss. And then I feel like he's kind of like looking around the barnyard of the people that are looking at the sky. He goes, there's Wagon O Oxen. Literally, there's a planet called Wagon O Oxen. I feel like he's just looking at things in the barnyard and like shouting them out. There's Kolob, there's Wayne. Wayne's World does exist.
Wayne
All these
Newton?
things. And they were hanging on his every word. But it's funny how, I never learned that when I was a kid, that these are the other names of the planets. They say Kolob, but the other ones are just too out there.
Yeah, we're busy subtracting planets. We had 9 when I was a kid. Now we've got 8.
Oh,
But
yeah,
Joseph Smith gives us
Pluto.
15 governing planets,
Yep.
which happen to be the same number as the 12 plus the first presidency.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, we're going far afield now. Did you want to add anything to that, Bill? Would you like me to teach you, give you a little tutorial in Zoom talk later?
I think you freaked everybody out with your Zoom talk, honestly.
I'll just make a note. In an early episode of Mormonism Live, we played a TikTok where somebody made Joseph Smith do that whole thing waxen, wagon,
Yeah.
oxen,
Yep.
and
Shinfless.
you could just imagine how
Yeah.
goofy it is to just invent your own astronomy and name planets, anyway. No, I think the Adamic language is just a clear example. It's not one you really want to talk about. Jacob Hansen himself in my interview admitted that he doesn't agree that Joseph Smith knew the Adamic language. And as soon as you start to pick these things apart and go, well, that actually is a problem for the truthfulness of the church, it doesn't make much sense to me that these guys spent a lot of time talking to the Salt Lake Tribune about it. Anyway.
Some things are just too embarrassing.
I'm sorry, I just lost you. I was following you right up to that. It didn't make a lot of sense that these guys spent a lot of time talking to the Salt Lake Tribune. Was there an article about this?
Yes, the Salt Lake Tribune. This is where I got the idea to cover this, was that the Salt Lake Tribune did a similar coverage of this book, and they picked out those three revelations, the Adamic language, the war prophecy, and the letter about Sarah Ann Whitney in regards to Joseph's polygamy. And so you have Stephen Smoot talking out loud about the Adamic language, that everybody now is reading the Tribune about that story. And if anybody just spends 10 seconds, which again, all of us Mormons never did. I never turned my brain on and thought about these things this way. But as soon as you look at the Adamic language and go, there's like 3 English words in there. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make any sense. How did the Adamic language come from anything that would resemble English? And it shouldn't. That makes no sense at all. But that's what we're left with, is Anglesmen.
Well, this is one of those things that I knew about, of course, because I studied, but I was never comfortable with it because it seemed a little bit English. I mean, if Amun is God and son Amun is the son of God and Anglo-man is the angels, it's just like, okay, let's go to something else now.
Yeah,
that's one of those many subjects in Mormonism where I personally, and I think other people may have done the similar thing, it comes with red flags attached and neon signs going, do not go into this any deeper. So I didn't, until I finally realized maybe finding out the truth about things is more important than just defending one side of the argument. And that's when I left apologetics and started studying things a little bit more objectively.
Yeah, you get embarrassed. You get embarrassed by some of these things that you have to read out of a lesson manual or hear about. Like I think about, do you remember the Hosanna shout, right? When they did it in conference, the one where Oaks was off, left shark.
It was the other two who were off.
What?
Oaks was totally on beat. The other two were off.
Oh, that's what it was. But I mean, I think about that. So that's something that it sounds amazing. Right? On paper, it sounds incredible. And so we had family members and friends that were posting all day about conference, all through the 2 days, posting every single thing that they did. For example, here's our conference pancakes. Here's our, every minutia of conference. And then when it came to that moment where they were actually going to sit in their home and do that, they didn't post about that. They didn't even talk about that, because I think there's just this moment of self-awareness where you're like, oh my goodness, this is awkward. This is kind of embarrassing. This is not what we thought it would be. And to me, the Hosanna shout is one of those big ones.
Yeah, I agree. So Bill, you're putting this back up on the screen.
Just to say, I mean, the son Amun is the son of God. Amun Anglesmen is what angels are called. So angels and angles is the same word, but somehow one language at the beginning of time and the other one has slowly turned into English after 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't one of the top 3 I'd be sharing with the Tribune, but apparently they think it's remarkable and it's evidence that Joseph Smith was a true prophet.
Yeah.
How else would he know the Adamic language?
How else?
All right. So I think that's the main stories, but Rebecca, you don't have to remind me. I saw you were about ready to. Rebecca has a nice denouement to this evening show.
I had to. I just had to when I saw this. I just had to include it. Sometimes I just throw things in because I thought when I watched this clip that we're about to show, I felt like it was Mormonism finally spoken out loud. And this is from a single adult conference that was held in Orem, Utah over the weekend. Brad Wilcox was one of the keynote speakers. He was there talking to the youth. And this is the very end, I think, of their final fireside. The closing prayer has already been said, and someone has to get up and just give a few more quick announcements to all these young adults who are here. And I just felt like, oh my goodness, this is Mormonism right here.
couple of real quick announcements. The numbers are in. There's 329 men and 654 women here. Refreshments are in the south building. And if you'd like to help clean up, please meet over by the custodial. We need vacuuming, mopping, and cleaning the bathrooms. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A little guy like Spencer Kimball in the background. I love the reaction on his face when he hears twice as many girls there as women.
And they all laughed. They should not be laughing. Like, I want to cover this article. I'm not kidding. This disparity between the number of men and women, marriageable young adults. Women need to take note. This is not a laughing matter, honestly, although I'm laughing and my eyes are watering. But don't you think first you have the gender gap, then you have refreshments, and then you need to scrub the bathroom. I mean, I just thought it covered everything.
I know, it's like Surf City. 2 girls for every boy.
Or it's actually worse than that. I mean, that was just that one conference. It's actually, I think, 6 girls for every guy in Rexburg. So I've heard.
Wow. Let's all move to Rexburg, Bill.
It's going to be hard
It's
going to be hard for I mean, obviously we understand the whole point of this. It's going to be hard for believing women who are encouraged to not settle for anything less than a temple marriage to find a temple marriage. And as you pointed out before we even started the show, these women, if I'm a single sister and I hear those numbers, at that point, I'm going to go home and go, you know what? I'm going to start looking outside the church. I'm not going to let this thing tell me that I need to marry a faithful, worthy man in the church when the chances of me finding that is slim to none. And I don't want to make any horrible jokes, but I hear a lot of stories from people about the men who are in those older singles groups. And it, in other words, the 2-to-1 numbers, it's actually way worse than that, if I can say that.
Yeah,
no, it is. That's a huge soapbox. I have a huge soapbox on this, and I'll do it right now. No, I think, can I do it right now? I feel like it's a disservice to women in the church of any age to not be really upfront about those numbers. It really is, I believe, 5 or 6 to 1 in Rexburg, somewhere like that. Church-wide, the disparity is at least 3 to 1. And I feel that women are owed that. They need to be told that. And I feel like leadership should say, look, the odds are against you. Why don't you just, like you said, Bill, look outside, find another nice Christian person, find somebody that will support what you're doing, find somebody. And I'll tell this story very quickly. This is about my husband. So when he was little, his parents got divorced in the 60s. Now that's rough. He had a huge family. I'll say it was over 10 kids, right? That is unheard of in the 60s to get divorced in that situation. So his mom is single and she goes to a single adult activity. She's 40 years old, right? And she's divorced and she has 10 kids, 2 sets of twins. I mean, we're talking, this is a package. So she meets a wonderful man there. He hangs out with LDS people. He is friends with LDS people. He's not LDS, right? They start dating. They start going out. It gets where they're getting more serious. She goes to the stake president, and this man's my hero, and I think changed everybody's lives, at least in my husband's family. She said to him, he's not LDS, but he wants to marry me, and he wants to bring my 10 children to his house, and he wants to help us and support us and send us on missions and send us to school. Now think about this stake president. You know as well as I do that he could have said, oh no, you need to hold out for that temple marriage, right? You know that there were stake presidents that would say that. This man didn't say that. He said, do it, go for it. And it changed the trajectory of all those people and all those families for life. And he eventually, years later, did join the church, but he was a wonderful Christian gentleman. And they had a wonderful life even before he joined the church. So that's my soapbox, locking it down that it has to be someone in the LDS church. It's a disservice, I think, to women that would like to experience life and family and kids. I don't know. I feel pretty strongly about it.
Well, referencing back to a recent episode that we did, apparently this stake president didn't take his job as seriously as a judge in Israel as others.
Exactly. But thank goodness, right?
Yes,
I'm not kidding.
absolutely.
He could have just easily said, you know what? I'm sure there'll be someone else who'll take you 40-year-old and your 10 kids. I'm sure there'll be someone else. You just hold out for that. Nope. And I know that she would have done whatever he said. So thank goodness for this man who really saw things clearly.
I'll tell you the other thing I thought, which is if I'm a guy sitting in that crowd and I'm a halfway decent guy, Got moderate
Good to know.
looks. I got
Yep.
a
Oh,
decent
yeah.
job.
You can get a
I'm
10.
shooting for the stars. I'm gonna
Yep.
take the top 10% and ask them on a date.
Yep.
Uh,
100%.
yeah.
Yes, this period of time in the LDS Church will be known to future historians as the rise of the Dilbert.
There is that, honestly. Yeah, you can date way beyond your, A team, B team. There's all that. You can date
Bill.
way beyond that if you're a faithful member who's a guy who can take someone to the temple.
Yes. And Bill, I was thinking about that line long before you said what you said. I want you to know that was not personal. That was not directed at you.
Not personal at all. Aim for the stars, fellas.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's about everything for tonight. Anybody correct me if I'm wrong. If there's anything else anybody else wants to say.
It was a lot.
Hearing nothing? No? Okay, then we'll end the episode here. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on the Mormon Newscast. Please join us next week, next Monday, 6:00 p.m. Mountain Time for the next episode. Until then, thank you so much, Rebecca Biblioteca and Bill Reel, for joining me on this episode. Thanks, everybody, for watching.